So for the last couple days, we have been finding trig ratios using the unit circle and using other things. But the thing was, in each of those cases, we knew the angle. You can actually find trig ratios even if you don't know the angle, if you're given one trig ratio. So that's what we're going to talk about today, calculating trig ratios from a given ratio. So let's use this example here. If I know that the sine of theta is 40 over 41, I can actually find the other 5 trig ratios without ever finding what theta is. Could I find what theta is? Sure I could. That's back to doing right triangle trig like you learned in geometry class. But then once I found theta, then I would have to go forward and find all the other trig ratios when I really don't need to do that. So here's what you do. Well, what do we know about sine? We know that sine, by definition, is opposite over hypotenuse. So if the sine of theta is 40 over 41, then that means that the opposite was 40 and the hypotenuse was 41. Now, it could have also been multiples of these that reduced to 40 over 41, but we really don't care because everything else would have had to reduce also. So if we want to find the other 5 trig ratios, we've got cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent, then we need to find the third side of our triangle. Well, that's relatively easy to do. We can use the Pythagorean theorem. So we know that the opposite squared plus the adjacent squared equals the hypotenuse squared. So then we do our Pythagorean theorem, 1600 plus a squared equals 1681. Solve for a squared equals 81. So a equals 9. Remember back in the day we used to do plus minus 9? Well, that still applies, but if we're talking about triangles, you're not going to have a side of negative 9. So that's why we have positive 9 here. All right, so now we know not only that our opposite is 40 and our hypotenuse is 41, but we also know that our adjacent is 9. So then it's just a matter of plugging in. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, 9 over 41. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, 40 over 9. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So we just take the reciprocal of this, 41 over 40. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine, 41 over 9. Cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, 9 over 40. So that's all there is to it. So basically, we started off with one ratio, found out what that is by definition, opposite over hypotenuse, used the Pythagorean theorem to find the third side, and then just plug those in. Now, you're going to have to think a little bit. They could get a little tricky on you if they give you secant. Let's say they tell you that the secant of theta equals 50 over 30. Well, what does that mean? Well, we know that secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So if cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, then secant is hypotenuse over adjacent. Okay, so if they give you those, or we could have just flipped that, made that cosine, and then we could go from there. All right, so I'm going to give you one to try. Let's pretend that we know that the tangent of theta is 24 over 7. So then you try to find the other 5 trig ratios. And voila! There they are. Check your answers and be ready for class.